Good morning. I am Karen Seymour Ells, and I serve on the board of DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. I want to welcome everyone to our service this morning, and I want to welcome visitors especially to our open and inclusive community of faith. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another as we explore those paths. I would like to especially welcome our guests and welcome again those who have visited us before. Visitors, it is the custom of our congregation to invite you to stand and give your name and where you are from if you're comfortable doing so. Are there any visitors who would like to introduce themselves this morning?
I'm Barbara Michael, and I'm from Marquette, Michigan, in that congregation, but I've actually moved to Chicago to help take care of a grandbaby, so I'm going to you.
Welcome.
It's good to be with you all this morning.
Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I'd like to welcome everyone visiting today. Did I miss anyone? No. Okay. Please join us after the service for coffee hour. We would love to have a chance to get to know you better. Our minister, Reverend Tom Capo, our congregational life coordinator, Mary Law, and all of our members are eager to meet you. A number of the board members will also be present today for coffee with the board. We grab a cup of coffee in Creeves Hall and head up the stairs or take the elevator up. We are in the founder's room after the service today. For those of you who are live streaming via YouTube today, please be aware that during Joys and Concerns, the live stream will go blank, and it will return after Joys and Concerns concludes. Our service can be heard outside the glass doors at the back of the sanctuary should anyone feel the need to leave the service for any reason. There are chairs outside for your convenience. As we begin our service, I'd like to ask you please silence all electronic devices. Thank you.
As we light our chalice, let us reflect from which we draw inspiration, women and men of long ago and today, whose people's lives remind us to be kind and fair.
Veterans Day is when we honor all persons who served in the United States Armed Forces. Would those who have served in any branch of the military please stand? You swore, oh. We're going to do that in a minute, but it's okay. You swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, thus making a commitment to all of us. Today, we remember your sacrifice and your courage. For all your service and your commitment, we thank you. Now, would everyone stand in body or spirit, and let's sing the Navy hymn, All in Peril. Notice there are instructions, so follow the instructions. Good morning. I am Reverend Tom Kappa, the minister here at DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church, and I welcome all those who are watching us on YouTube today as well. This month we are exploring the theme of being a people connected by memory. Today we reflect on whose shoulders we stand upon, our forebears who helped us create and sustain Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalist minister Kathleen McTeague wrote, "In the struggles we choose for ourselves, in the ways we move forward in our lives and bring our world forward with us, it is right to remember the names of those who gave us strength in this choice of living. It is right to name the power of hard lives well lived. We share a history with those lives." In knowing our Unitarian Universalist history, my friends, we can know something of where we came from, who we are, and where our faith might be heading. So let us enter into this time of reflection and worship.
And I am going to say that I think that it still reflects how I feel about this church and the people who come to this church. We don't always get everything we want, but together we can each individually and while supporting each other, hopefully get what we need. And I'm looking forward to continuing on that journey with each and every one of you. Now, Alan, our lead vocalist, has a little touch of laryngitis, I gather, and is getting a little help today, correct?
With a little help from my friends, but that's a different band.
But I love that song too, so we could do that as well. But Jane and John, at the very last minute, have jumped in as an assist, so I want to give a special thanks to them.
I saw her today at the reception, a glass of wine in her hand. I knew she was gonna meet her connection. At her feet was a footloose man. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, well, you might find you get what you need. Oh, baby.
And I went down to the demonstration to get my fair share of abuse, singing we're gonna vent our frustration, and if we don't, we're gonna blow a 50-amp fuse. Sing it now. Get what you want. I can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, I think you just might find you get what you need. Oh yeah.
Well, I went down to the Chelsea drugstore to get your prescription filled. I was standing in line with Mr. Jimmy, and the man, he looked pretty ill. We decided that we would have soda, my favorite flavor, cherry red. And he said one word to Mr. Jimmy, and he said one word to me, you is dead. Well, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. Oh yeah. I saw her today at the reception. In her glass was a bleeding man. She was practiced at the art of deception. Well, I could tell by her blood-stained hands. People sing it now. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. No, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you just might find, you get what you need. Oh, yeah. Get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, well, you might find get what you need. Oh, baby, you get what you need. You get what you need. You get what you need. You get what you need.
The theme for this month is, how are we a people of memory? And today we're going to remember that there have been many people who have worked for religious freedom and a better world. The saying goes that we stand on the shoulders of the people who have come before us. So this morning I'm going to share with you the story of Francis David. Well, that's how he's known in the American Unitarian Universalist circles, but in Hungarian, his name is David Ferenc. He was a preacher and a bishop in Transylvania, and he is the person most responsible for establishing Unitarian Universalism in that land, where it still exists to this day, 450 years later. So when you hear of Transylvania being spoken of, you're probably thinking mostly of vampires, right? Well, there's much more to Transylvania than that. It sits at the crossroads between Europe and the Middle East, and it has been repeatedly been overrun by different conquerors and rulers over the centuries. The Romans conquered it in the 2nd century, so today's nation, Romania, of which Transylvania is now a part of, takes its name from the Roman conquest. Later, the land was overrun by various armies that Western Europeans call barbarians, primarily the Goths and the Huns. And at various times, Transylvania was under the rule of the Ottoman Turks, and up until the First World War, it was part of Hungary. So Transylvania is a beautiful land bounded by the snow-capped Carpathian Mountains to the north and other mountain ranges to the south. And it is a heavily forested land with grand and beautiful scenery. And today, its inhabitants live and farm much as they did 450 years ago in small villages, working cooperatively. And some American UU congregations have partner churches in Transylvania that are located in villages that are mostly or entirely Unitarian. So how did Unitarianism come to grow in Transylvania? Well, Francis David had a great role in that. So this was during a time of great intellectual and religious uproar. Europe had been under the Roman Catholic Church, but the 16th century, when Francis lived, was a time of the Reformation, in which people began to break away from the rule of the church. So an exciting part of the life of Francis was when he joined the Reformation. And this was the tremendous revolution that changed the history of Christian religious ideas for all times by making it possible for protesters to form their own religious groups. And that is how our first Unitarian churches were founded in the late 1560s by a group of protesters. So in Transylvania, Francis was their leader. Other people began to call them the Unitarians because uni means one, and they believed in one God. And they also believed that you and I are just as divine as Jesus was. So in just 10 years, 500 churches changed to be Unitarian. And you could read the words, God is one, above the doors of those churches. So about that same time, the king of Transylvania was young John Sigismund. He was crowned king when he was just 21 years old, which is usually not old enough to be a king. But the people of Transylvania were lucky because young King John was both brave and thoughtful. He needed to be, because at this time the people were in big trouble. The two huge empires on either side of Transylvania were fighting each other, and the Transylvanians were always in danger of being pulled into those fights. But worse yet, the people in Transylvania were also fighting each other. And they fought because after the changes of the Reformation, Transylvania now had 4 different competing religious groups. And sometimes the people in these different denominations fought each other with words, arguing and saying the worst things they could think of about each other, whether or not they were true. But sometimes they fought by taking people's jobs away, or taking away their money, or by putting people in prison, or by killing each other. So King John thought long and hard and carefully about these problems, and he decided what he would do is he would call the best, most convincing leader from each denomination to come together at a place called Torta for a debate. So these 4 leaders came and they debated for 10 days, beginning at 5 o'clock every morning. And they would debate all day. So there was a speaker for the Catholics, and one for the Lutherans, one for the Calvinists, and Francis David debated for the Unitarians. Can you guess who won? It was Francis David. He won the debate for the Unitarians. He did so well that even King John, who had grown up Catholic, decided to become a Unitarian. But, and this is the most important part of the story, the part that you must remember so that you can tell other people when they ask you what it means to be Unitarian Universalists. But even though our Unitarian ideas had been judged better than the others, King John did not make all the people of Transylvania become Unitarians. King John said that the people of Transylvania could debate their ideas about religion, but they could never again fight or punish or kill each other over their religious beliefs. They issued a law called the Edict of Torda, which said, faith is a gift from God. No one should be able to force their religion, their faith, on others. And this was a new and strange idea. It was the first time a religious tolerance law had been declared anywhere in Europe. So today, Unitarian Universalists remember King John because his law made it safe to be Unitarian, yet still left other people free to choose whatever religion they wanted to. However, King John died a few years later in an accident, and the new king adhered to his own religion. But Francis David continued to preach Unitarianism, a religion that said all people must have the freedom to change our religious beliefs as we grow into new understandings. So Francis was put into prison for preaching that and for practicing what he preached. And just before he died, he wrote a message on his prison wall. It said, "Nothing will hold up the truth on its way." The way that you'd probably say that today is, no force can stop that which is right. That is why some Unitarian Universalist churches here in our country have signs over the doors that say, 400 years of religious freedom. How good is it to know that Unitarian Universalists are here to carry on in our own way? King John Sigmason's religious tolerance and Francis David's religious freedom. Let's sing. Rise in body or spirit and sing rank by rank hymn number 358 in the gray hymnal. We'll sing the first 2 verses, and after the first verse, the youth and I will head out to our classes.
Our board members said it, but I'll reiterate it. During this sharing of joys and concerns, the live feed is cut off, so whatever gets said stays in the room. Today we take time during our worship to attend to those joys and concerns that some of you carry in your hearts. During this time of reverence and fellowship, we affirm that as a community, we share in your sorrow and rejoice in your happiness. When you come forward to share a joy or concern, please say your name so that we may know who you are as you share. You are now invited to come forward to share a joy or concern with this, your faith community. We share in those joys and concerns expressed and those not expressed, but very much with us.
One of the things that people don't understand about our movement is that it does really have a very rich historical past, not only roots that go back to the beginning of the Reformation in Europe, and a very rich history in the United States and colonial America.
I think what I want folks in our congregations to know is that if there's a candidate for the great American faith, it is us. Take a look at who signed the Declaration of Independence, and you see our names there. 3 of the first 6 American presidents were Unitarian. And I'm pretty proud of the country that we helped build.
This faith, the more I learn about it and discover it, is ingrained in the values that the American Constitution was put together with. It's about acceptance and tolerance and liberty and freedom to believe. I think it's inherent in who we are as citizens of this country.
Most of the idea of universalism, although it had some roots in England, is really indigenous to our own country. Very simple, plain folks, mostly farmers and tradespeople, who really did believe that a loving God wouldn't damn people to hell. Unitarians, although they also believed in a benevolent God, put more stress on what William Ellery Channing called character. He called it salvation by character. He said what matters isn't what you believe, it's how you live your life. And Ralph Waldo Emerson and all those other luminaries from the 19th century and the Unitarian side of our movement made that kind of assertion.
For both the Unitarians and the Universalists, the people in the church had a moral obligation to reform society. And so it wasn't simply about getting your soul right with God. It really had very much to do with helping your society live up to its highest principles. So by the mid-20th century, the Unitarians and Universalists saw that they had more and more in common, and in 1961, they formed the Unitarian Universalist Association and brought their 2 traditions together.
can't say that when I was new to Unitarian Universalism, I paid a lot of attention to its history. I was more interested in exploring my own personal theology and just hanging out with a bunch of Unitarian Universalists. That was great. But, you know, I came to services pretty regularly, and so I began to hear a few things, like the story of Francis David and King Sigismund, the story of John Murray preaching the Universalist message, the first Universalist message in America at Thomas Potter's chapel after his boat was stranded off the coast of the wilderness of New Jersey. And as a Catholic, or as a former Catholic, I found the story of the First Council of Nicaea. This is a picture of that. In 325 BCE, quite interesting. You see, I grew up as a Catholic, so I thought, you know, Jesus was always thought to be divine. But not so much. At the council, the divinity of Jesus was decided essentially for political reasons. Emperor Constantine brought the leaders of the new Christian church together to decide this divinity question because he wanted them to stop bickering. He wanted to use this new religion to kind of bond people to his empire. Now, I don't know if this is true for you, but these were the stories that caught my attention as an early Unitarian Universalist. Perhaps others have caught your attention. And then I decided to become a UU minister. I heard the call, and I decided I needed to become a UU minister and would go to seminary. I don't know how many of you know how many books I had to read on Unitarian Universalist history and its forebears. I have to say, and this is just apart from going to school or taking any classes, the books stacked about this high, at least as tall as this pulpit. And then, beyond that, I had to take a course in Unitarian Universalist history. And, you know, going through all of that, you think, wow, that's a lot of information. Well, you know, I not only had to digest it, I had to regurgitate it. You know, I had to write papers, I had to take tests. You know, I remember some of the papers I wrote on the Unitarian Universalist history. I wrote on the Universalist history before, and then after it came to America, I wrote on all kinds of things related to Transcendentalists and Polish Unitarians and their influence on America. I wrote 20 and 30 and 40-page papers. And after a while, you'd think some of that would stick. But not so much. I mean, you all had that experience. You all have gone to school. You read and read and read, and you have to digest all this information, regurgitate it out. How much do you remember from when you were in high school or college? Not terribly much. So, what else was I to do? I started getting my own library. And if you've been in my office, you can see I have at least 6 or 7 bookcases in there, most of which are Unitarian Universalist, history, biography, books written by Unitarian Universalists. Now that's fine, and I don't have to remember all the history now. I can just go into my library and pull a book out. But part of me wants to remember the history. I want to be able to say, if somebody comes up to me and asks me, who King Sigismund was and how, he had the Edict of Torda, what that was all about, I wouldn't be able to tell them. Not say, give me a minute, I'm going to go check out my library. Well, here's the thing. You don't always get what you want. Wondered how I was going to fit that in, right? But sometimes you get what you need. At some point in my 15-plus years of parish ministry, and I can't tell you exactly when, something began to change. Some of our history and our forebears began to become more meaningful to me, important to how I live my life, how I view the world. Perhaps you've had this experience as well. You go to school, you take all these classes, and and it's just vague information that's in your mind. But when you get out into the real world and start doing your job or you start living life, some of that stuff actually becomes important. And so you start remembering it and reflecting on it, thinking about it. And so I want to share a little bit of a story with you in a minute. But first I want Chuck to read something to you.
One of our forebears was the first woman to graduate from a theological school, the first full-time female ordained minister and Universalist minister, Olympia Brown, who lived from 1835 to 1926. She wrote, "Dear friends, stand by this faith. Work for it and sacrifice for it. There is nothing in the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before you loftiest ideals, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for noble duty, and made the world beautiful for you. Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that you are worthy to be entrusted with this great message and that you are strong enough to work for a true principle without counting the cost."
I heard that quote a lot growing up Unitarian. When I grew up Unitarian, when I became a Unitarian, that quote was said a lot. But I didn't know what it really meant. Work for it, sacrifice for it, do not expect immediate results. Took me a lot of time to really understand what that quote meant on an emotional and personal level. To really put together the extent of work and sacrifice that Olympia Brown put into our faith. And how what she worked for is still being carried forward by our Unitarian Universalist women ministers. Several years ago, after I'd become a Unitarian Universalist minister, and I was preparing a sermon, and I thought, wow, this is a great quote. I'll put it in the sermon. And as I started to do that, something clicked inside me. I started to reflect back on a little bit of Olympia Brown's history, what she went through, and I sort of made a connection inside me. I started thinking about my first female clergy, the first female clergy I ever met. Her name was Reverend Marjorie Montgomery, and she was the minister of First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church, my first home church. When I joined the church in 1979, there were not a lot of women ministers. And I remember talking with Marjorie sometime over the many years we were together, her telling me stories about when she went on retreat with the other UU ministers, who were all male, that they would ignore her, wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't acknowledge that she had anything of value to say. And I remember how some of the men in our congregation would aggressively argue with her. Not debate, like talk about issues, but full-blown arguments in front of other congregants about the work she was doing at the church or about her services. See, we pride ourselves as a denomination, now 40 years later, on the number of women we have as clergy in our ranks. At least 50+% of the UU clergy now are women. And yet, back then, it was not easy, nor was it fun to be in those first waves of Unitarian Universalist female clergy. And yet they persisted, sacrificed, and worked for our faith. And I, for one, am grateful for women like Marjorie, who dug in and stuck with it despite the abuse, being ignored. I believe Unitarian Universalist women ministers continue to influence the clergy today. I can tell you for myself that what used to happen at ministers' retreats no longer happens. Instead, those retreats are about supporting one another, listening to one another, caring about one another. We've learned that self-care and collegial support are essential. And UU women brought something amazing to our denomination. They really taught us that we were not only preachers, but we needed to be pastors, concerned about the needs and feelings of the whole person, of each and every congregant in our congregations. And they still are leaders, teaching us and leading us in this denomination. In 2016, at the Berry Street Essay, it's a lecture that happens at the end of ministry days, which is our training before General Assembly begins. Reverend Gail Seavies said, I've seen smart people, good people, fail to understand the impact of sexual misconduct, how pervasive and systematic it is, not just among us, but throughout our culture. For years, the system at the Unitarian Universalist Association and in our congregations has been to protect the privileged instead of the vulnerable. And then she did it. She called out the names of male clergy who had committed sexual misconduct, many of whom have never been held accountable. She risked much in doing so. But her courageous speech has opened up conversations within the UU clergy that had never happened before, and has resulted in new processes within Unitarian Universalism and within the Unitarian Universalist Minister Association to more effectively deal with clergy's sexual abuse. Many Unitarian Universalist women ministers have worked, sacrificed, risked, and still stuck with our faith despite personal costs. Now I want to share a little bit about Olympia Brown. Chuck's going to read you a little bit about her story. This is from an article by Nick Greer, a philosophy professor from the University of Idaho.
Quickly tiring of sexist comments by her professors at Mount Holyoke College, Brown enrolled at Antioch College, received her BA in 1860. Brown then wished to pursue a seminary degree, but she was denied admission at Oberlin College, Lombard University, and Meadville Unitarian Seminary simply because she was a woman. In 1861, St. Lawrence University did accept her, even though its president, Ebenezer Fisher, wrote that it was not expedient for women to become preachers. Although the male students did not treat her well, she finished her seminary degree in 2 years, graduating in 1863. Appealing to the basic principle of equality, Brown convinced, even in the face of opposition, the Northern Universalist Association to ordain her as a Universalist minister in 1863. One of the St. Lawrence faculty members helped her obtain her first preaching post at the Universalist Church in Marshfield, Vermont. While the church was willing to have a woman as its minister, no family would offer her lodging. From Vermont, she moved on to a very successful 6-year ministry at the Universalist Church of Weymouth Landing, Massachusetts. In seminary, she'd been ridiculed for her squeaky voice. So she arranged elocution lessons at the D.O. Lewis School in Boston. Her new commanding voice impressed all who listened to her, and it became a real asset when she went on the road giving hundreds of speeches for women's suffrage. After leading and restoring 2 failed Universalist churches in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Racine, Wisconsin, Brown went on to her second goal in life. From liberating women for religious leadership to to freedom in the political realm, organizing against the disenfranchisement of women. Brown's daughter once wrote, "The ministry was the first objective of her life, since in her youthful enthusiasm, she believed that freedom of religious thought in a liberal church would supply the groundwork for all other freedoms."
I forgot to mention in the previous service, but there's a woman minister at the Racine Unitarian Church right now, and it's still going strong. I want to affirm again my gratitude for the life, work, and sacrifice of Olympia Brown. Today she holds a place within me. I cannot look around at the many female clergy in our faith and not think of the impact she had on Unitarian Universalism. So who are the Unitarian Universalist forebears you will remember? And why will you remember them? We don't have to remember all the ones in all the books in my library, just the ones that mean something to you. You might look up some of the biographies of Unitarians and Universalists or pick up a book on Unitarian Universalist history. After you learn about our forebears, let them live within you for a while. You too might find yourself engaged with your Unitarian Universalist faith in a new, more meaningful, more personal, more dynamic way than ever before.
So earlier in this week when I got the script for this service, now I know you're thinking, oh, you just guys made this up all along. No. If we didn't have a script, I'd be stuck because I'm not very glib at making things up. But I saw the Navy hymn. Well, after 10 years in the Navy, I'm wondering how are we going to do that? Because it's a very theistic piece. So I started doing research, and apparently there are many variations of this song. There was a time back in the 19th century that the Anglicans wrote 3 verses of their own because apparently they weren't Christian enough for the church. So I'm going to tell you about some of the other versions. There's the Navy General, which I don't understand at all because it is called the Navy hymn, right? Then there's ship commissioning, ship decommissioning, flyers, United States Marines, Coast Guard, Navy SEALs, Navy Seabees, doctors and corpsmen, female sailors, military families, astronauts, Antarctic exploration, and submariners. So as a submariner, I can't read these words out loud. But I tell you what, next service auction, if you bid high enough, I'll share those words with you. Our offering will now be given and received.
Well, we're not going to have time for our last hymn, but we're going to extinguish our chalice, and I have some closing words. One of our forebears was a poet, a transcendentalist, a writer, and a Unitarian minister, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he wrote, "Do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." Our Unitarian Universalist forebears did not go where others told them to go. They made their own path and stuck with it, even when others tried to stop them. And we're lucky they left us a trail. Now it's up to us to decide for ourselves whether to follow the trail they left for us, or perhaps create a new path for ourselves and leave a trail for future generations. I invite you now to stand in body or spirit, turn around and greet one another. Let us share the love of this community.